Welcome our next session on corn and soybean trade outlook, moderated by Katie Pinckey. First, I'd like to introduce Roz Leek. Rosalind is the Executive Director for Market Access and Strategy, as well as Northeast Asia Regional Director at the U.S. Soybean Export Council, USEC. Roz has years of experience in the grain trade field and is currently serving on the Management Council of the International Grain Trade Coalition and is a cleared advisor and vice chair for USDA and the United States Trade Representative for Trade in Grains, Feeds, Oil, and Planting Seeds. She remains a partner in her family's grain and livestock farm in Illinois. Next, Carrie Siferath. Carrie serves as vice president for the U.S. Grains Council, a nonprofit organization that promotes the global use of U.S. barley, corn, sorghum, and related products, including ethanol and distillers' dried grains with solubles. He's responsible for the oversight of 10 international offices and worldwide programs. Carrie Siferath and Roz Leek under the microscope of Katie Pinckey.
I didn't bring my microscope today, so we're going to be all right. All right, welcome. All right, again, same deal, folks. Go ahead and use that QR code on your table. If you don't know how to use a QR code, ask somebody that's my age or younger, and they will quickly help you, or one of the people with the program. Go ahead and use that QR code to submit your questions. Otherwise, Roz and Carrie have to answer my questions. They would prefer yours. All right, go ahead and just get us started, Roz, and share with us a little bit about trade and what your organization is doing.
Well, thank you, Katie, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share some of our perspective as the U.S. Soybean Export Council as it relates to trade, particularly in soy and soy products. You know, I have to say, when the invitation came to go to Fargo in February, I had some trepidation. However, it's turned out just fine. So thank you for ordering up some nice weather for us, because I'm not quite built for true winter when it comes to what you all are used to. But so my organization, or our organization, the U.S. Soybean Export Council, we represent the U.S. soy industry in the international marketplace. So we do that through a membership program. We have over 115 members that represent the entire value chain. So everything from farm organizations and associations, so North Dakota Soybean, both on the association side as well as on the checkoff side, are members of USEC, as well as input companies, equipment manufacturers, exporters, again, the entire supply chain. So we have a pretty broad perspective when it comes to what's going on in the U.S. soy industry. But our responsibility and role is to be able to promote soy and soy uses around the world. So we operate in more than 82 countries where we are representing the U.S. soy industry to use 3 terms from our strategic plan to attain, differentiate, and elevate U.S. soy. So we do that through partnership and funding from the national checkoff as well as various state checkoffs. So appreciate the support we have received from North Dakota checkoff over the years. And then we also are a cooperator under the, we receive cooperator funds through the U.S. Department of Agriculture Foreign Market Development and Market Access Program. So that is kind of how we are funded. And kind of what we do. But we have a tremendous responsibility and opportunity to be able to represent farmers and the farm interests around the world. So it's something that I find great pleasure in as a farm girl, and wake up kind of every day thinking about soybeans, which some of my friends think is a little bit odd, but nevertheless, I find
You're not the only one in the room.
Yes, exactly. So I'll turn it over to Carrie, but look forward to the questions. I don't want to kind of belabor the point of trying to share things off the cuff, but as opposed to would rather be able to answer what you all want to know. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I'll turn it over to my pal, Carrie.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to be here in Fargo, North Dakota. I'm Vice President of the U.S. Grains Council from our Washington, D.C. office, where our headquarters is. If you're not familiar, the U.S. Grain Council develops markets for U.S. corn, barley, and sorghum, as well as their co-products. Our big co-products today are grain-based ethanol exports, doing huge amounts of work around the world to to promote exports of U.S. ethanol, and then some of the corn co-products, distillers dried grains or DDGS, corn fermented proteins, and some of the other products. And I'll probably make it a little bit short. Very similar to the soybean side of things, we're membership driven. So through the corn, barley, and sorghum state associations and the state checkoffs here in North Dakota, the North Dakota Corn Utilization Council, North Dakota Corn Growers Association, but even the North Dakota Barley checkoff here is a member of ours. Similar through the value chain of members. I think pretty much all the ethanol plants here in North Dakota are a member of the Grain Council, but the seed tech companies, the exporters and originators are all members of ours, and together work to export feed grains, all three of those, and their co-products around the world. And very similar, we apply for the same type of export marketing programs through USDA, the Market Access Program, the Foreign Market Development, and there's a new one that's just going to be introduced here in the coming months that we can maybe talk about later.
Awesome. Well, we'll get started. Price is significant in purchasing decisions, but how else can we differentiate U.S. corn and soybeans from our competition?
Well, I know Roz will talk about sustainability, and they've had theirs around for a while. The U.S. Grain Council just February last year announced our own sustainable corn export platform, and trying to, one, differentiate U.S. corn as being sustainable, and we can issue a record of sustainability to go along with that. Just found out last night we hit our first 1 million tons of sustainable corn exports within even just short of one full year. So it's 39.6 million bushel. So it's still a small part of our total exports, but growing much faster than I thought it would. And then just the whole U.S. system. We can talk about logistics, but global grain logistics is a big mess today in many ways. But the U.S. being able to be a reliable supplier and having the internal logistic issues, whether we're moving grain and soybeans by rail out to the PNW, whether we're moving down the river system to New Orleans, whether we're putting in containers and moving it across the world in containers. Just very efficient system that I don't think our competitors can match, and so they try to match it by dropping price. So then you get into the price discussion. But I think just the logistics we have and the reliable supplier that the U.S. is on, whether it's corn or soybeans, really sets us apart.
Roz, anything you want to add?
So I would say yes to everything Carrie said. The couple things specific in the soy industry that I think we work very, very diligently to do is to differentiate. As you heard when I talked about our strategic plan, it's one of our 3 pillars of our strategic plan is differentiating U.S. soy versus that of other origins and other protein sources. And so when you look at U.S. soy, we have a lot of benefit that there's some intrinsic and extrinsic benefit. But one of the biggest things that we have relative to our competition is consistency in supply. So you know that if you're getting number 2 yellow soybeans from the U.S., it's going to be very, very consistent. That quality is going to be very consistent, which for an animal user or for a crusher is incredibly important because you don't have to adjust your rations. There's also a tremendous amount of value that is in the soy that is produced in the United States. So you have the consistency, but then the nutrient bundle that is within that soybean or that soybean meal is also quite important. We have an advantage on amino acids and on sugars and energy and a number of different nutritional components. I will not pretend to be an animal nutritionist because I am anything but. I'm an economist, and so you know what that means. But nevertheless, I think that it's been an opportunity for us, and there are some destinations that will pay a premium for U.S. soybean meal just because of the performance that their animals have. As these customers say, the animals don't lie. But, price is still an incredibly important part, and you will see many places around the world that are still incredibly price dependent. But when you can demonstrate that value proposition for paying a little bit more and what it means to their business from a return on investment, you can sometimes change those hearts and minds but you also have to do it across the entire value chain, because as a recovering trader, a reformed trader, I will say, all we cared about was trying to make the most money. So we didn't really have a loyalty or an appreciation of what was happening downstream. We were just the middleman trying to procure the product. They would give us a spec and we would do it. But if those specs were communicated, and the importance of that product quality being communicated throughout the chain, there would be some other purchase decisions being made differently, I believe.
We have some questions coming in. Thank you for both of that. How do you view the rapid expansion of soybean crushing in the U.S. for renewable diesel fuel? And then also we could touch on ethanol into jet fuel as fuel
Carrie, do you want to talk about crushing? No, I'm kidding. Oh. So we see this as a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity for our sector. It's a tremendous opportunity for farmers to have additional crush assets to where you can add that value here at home. And then we can also have have an increased renewable diesel profile that is helping green the economy, helping reduce our carbon footprints. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. It also has given us an opportunity to be able to do more work with soybean meal. Traditionally, we have only had about 13 million tons of soybean meal to export, 12 to 13 million tons. So we haven't had that much to even promote. And you would have customers who would say, we want U.S. soybean meal, but we can't even get offers. We can't even get anybody to consider, to try and make an offer to us. And so now we have that opportunity. And as you'll see, you know, when you're looking at global shipments for soy, when you're looking at U.S. soy shipments out this year, soybean meal is leading the charge. We actually are seeing fewer soybeans going. They're lagging. It's not because there's necessarily more being used domestically. That's certainly a small portion of it. But you're seeing the demand for soybean meal from the United States continuing to increase. So we're at a pace faster than we've had in the last decade. And that's exciting because it does drive value back into the local economy. So I think it's an exciting opportunity for us as export promoters. We have something to talk about other than just whole soybeans, with a little more behind it. But then it's also quite exciting for the rural communities.
You touched on exports. We'll jump in and talk a little bit. We're getting some export and South America questions. How may we best compete with South America when they have the potential to expand acres in a big way?
Yeah, well, one, I don't think you're going to stop what they're doing in South America, and if it economically pays out to continue to expand production, I think they'll continue to do that. At the same time, just as we're getting crunched price-wise here in the Midwest, you're seeing those price crunches in Mato Grosso and other parts of South America. So again, you know, the Grain Council, we do a lot of work of trying to build demand in other forms of, you know, so let's turn the corn into ethanol and move it out in that form. And Brazil's a big ethanol producer as well, some from sugar corn. They're building new corn-based ethanol plants, and so they're even a competitor that way. But it's, you know, even as we move, you know, Canada to the north here is our largest export customer for U.S. ethanol. There was, you know, a comment about ethanol into jet fuel, the SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel, and the alcohol to jet conversion, which looks to be a big part of that. And working to make sure those policies, you know, our counterparts, the National Corn Growers Association, working on those policies domestically, but how are those policies being set in Japan and Europe, South Korea, Colombia, lots of different places, so that U.S. ethanol has the ability to work its way into the SAF areas of there. Even like Japan, which is still a large market for U.S. corn exports, but very mature and probably even declining, but it's becoming a growing market for U.S. ethanol. Today, we're exporting ethanol in the form of ETBE, so using ethanol instead of methanol, because that's the way that Japan was doing it. They're now looking to go to direct blending of ethanol and moving to SAF production with ethanol. And so they're making that change together because they see the amount of ethanol they're going to have to bring in to produce SAF fuel in that alcohol to jet combination, we might also start blending it in our gasoline. We need the trade flow, we need the infrastructure to do that. And so they're making the change both on automobile transportation and airline transportation. And that's going on today. We expect Japan, which again has been a very large and mature market, maybe even slightly declining, now having growth opportunities in the form of corn and other grain-based ethanol exports.
Thank you. We'll jump into the next question. How will we be able to continue to compete with the rest of the world with our substantial higher standard of living and cost in the U.S.?
So I think that one of the opportunities the U.S. has is that we can provide whatever is requested from the customer. So we have a tremendous industry that's able to deliver on whatever the customer needs or requires. Our system is established to be able to do that. We have the technology, we have the sophistication within the agricultural sector to be able to do that. So I think that's one way that we're going to be able to compete. I think, as we discussed earlier, the reliability and the consistency of our product is also a way that we're going to continue to be able to compete. We are not going to be the cheapest, but we've also been talking at USEC. Okay, so let's talk about how do you get people to buy a Cadillac when perhaps a Chevy would be just fine? So we've been changing our mindset to really focus on the value. How do we become that? How do we actually demonstrate that value proposition in order and get people to make those kinds of decisions, to not just be looking only at price, but to be looking at what the entire value is, which includes the services that you all invest in having us and, a couple hundred people around the world who are providing technical assistance to different markets, who are providing marketing assistance, who are providing information about our products. So there's a lot that the U.S. has that is just unmatched by any other origin, and I think we need to continue to focus on that, invest in that, and recognize that the export market is an important market. It's where price is established at any given point, because everything backs up from CIF. And so from there, you also have to, we have to stay focused on that, but we also have to change our approach, because we are not the largest exporter, we are not the largest producer, nor will we ever, but we will continue to export about 60% of our crop in the form of beans, meal, or oil. So it's important to keep focusing on that.
Excellent. We have a farmer question I know coming in. Is the European farm crisis or farmers' strike going to affect our export? Will it increase it? What are your organizations doing to work with the European markets? There's about 3 questions in there that I'll let you bite off as you'd like.
Well, and Roz spends a lot of time working on Europe, probably more than I do. But and Europe's, on a soybean versus corn, a much bigger soybean market than corn. The GM issues, we'll ship some corn and some corn co-products to Europe. I don't think the strike is doing much to affect exports. I think it's showing what the policies in Europe is doing to their own farmers. We're working to try and make sure those European policies don't spread to the rest of the world, and we're worried about meeting Brussels policy regulations in Kenya or something, right? And it's easy to slide that way. For us, again, we're seeing growth of exports of corn in the form of ethanol to Europe, working in Europe with SAF policy so that, again, corn-based ethanol can be part of that going forward. Again, we really see that as a way of working into that European market. But I don't know that the farmer strike is going to affect that much at all, other than just trying to keep that European policy that now the European farmers are protesting against from spreading to other markets around the world.
Yeah, I do spend quite a bit of time in Europe. So Europe is the second largest market for soybeans in the world when you look at beans and meal. So it's about a 30 million ton market. The largest soybean market in the world, or soy complex market, is China at 100 million tons. So Europe is second largest at 30 million tons. So that gives you the kind of the landscape of the soybean market, but it's an incredibly important market. They do tend to be a little bit more difficult to deal with, particularly for our corn products. But we've been able to maintain good access into Europe, and in fact, we've been able to continue to grow our market there. They do value sustainability. There's some regulatory changes that are taking place, some of them which have now taken the farmers out to the streets to try and fight. But there are some regulatory changes that are actually going to provide the U.S. quite a large opportunity. Another thing that is happening is because we do have more exportable meal now, we can access that market much more readily than we could before. We really had very little of the 15 million tons of soybean meal that were going to Europe just because we simply didn't have the product. Now we're already seeing the demand from Europe increase by quite a lot just since we've had more exportable meal. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to continue to hone that relationship. I think it also helps us. It helps us kind of de-risk our markets a little bit because we're able to form a tighter relationship with Europe and maybe become less reliant on some other markets that are a little more politically challenging, shall we say.
On to the next question, which is North Dakota exports to the PNW to Asian countries. Are there any markets that are of particular interest to your organizations and why?
Well, I mean, traditionally off the PNW, if you get the North Asia markets of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, that can easily be serviced from the PNW ports, China as well, Southeast Asia to some degree, probably more on the soybean side or soybean meal side, and we're actually seeing growth right now in the last, I would say, probably 45 days, and I would say probably through maybe April shipments even, as South Koreans, Japanese, and Taiwanese are buying more corn off the PNW. The freight spreads are working better there, even compared to Brazilian corn. But now we throw what's happened in the Panama Canal here, going back to probably early December. We're shipping corn to Guatemala off the PNW. I don't have my map here, but Guatemala is the largest U.S. corn market in Central America, but you got Guatemala, El Salvador, Costa Rica. The Panamanians were smart enough to build their feed industry on the Atlantic side, so they're used to bringing vessels down, going through the canal and up. Well, now grain vessels basically economically are kicked out of the Panama Canal today, and probably until maybe June or July, and when we get enough rain, I'm guessing. And so either if I'm loading a corn vessel in New Orleans to get to Guatemala, I got to go all the way around South America and come out. And so they're now not unheard of, but once every 25 years, maybe we load a corn vessel off the PNW to go to Central America, or even the Pacific ports in Colombia. So that's changing things, and actually even increasing the amount of corn being loaded off the PNW today. And again, where are we sourcing corn to ship off the PNW? It's the Dakotas, western Minnesota, possibly western Iowa or Nebraska, depends on rail freight spreads. But so that's a big positive for this part of the world, as we see those traditional North Asia markets look to the PNW today, and I would say at least through April, May, and even now Central America markets filling in because of what's going on logistically with the Panama Canal.
So we have a slightly different profile from the PNW for soybeans. So actually Japan and Korea and Taiwan still prefer to purchase through the Gulf of Mexico. So they still do most of their soy purchases from New Orleans. Whereas China has been the largest market for soy coming off the PNW. But just as Carrie said, one of the things that has changed for this year in particular is we're now seeing some soy that would never have gone from the PNW go down to Central America. We're also seeing those markets that have traditionally only wanted to purchase from the Gulf looking at the PNW. So Japan and Korea have been much more interested in getting offers from the PNW than they have in the past, and so that's quite a development, and it's largely driven because of the Panama Canal and then the fact that you can't really rely on the Suez Canal any longer either. So, but generally speaking, Southeast Asia is quite accessible. We do see a tremendous amount of opportunity for more soybean meal exports off of the PNW as we see the crush continue to expand up here in the upper Midwest.
You lead into a really good next question that our farmers want to hear. And what are your organizations actively doing to ensure that buyers know how to and that they can purchase U.S. corn and soybeans from the PNW ports? And we can talk more about that.
Yeah, in the Grain Council, we have a corn quality report. We do a corn harvest quality report every year over the last 13 years now. That takes corn samples from various parts of the U.S. as harvest is going on at that first point of sale. And we go out to our buyers around the world to show them the results of that. And then we have a corn cargo export quality report that comes out usually in early April that's taking samples directly from shipments that are being loaded. And that even breaks down into what we call catchment areas. So areas that are normally feeding corn out to the Pacific Northwest versus areas normally feeding into the river system to New Orleans, and even areas feeding to the Mexico rail market. And so we spend most of January going around the world doing that. I was actually in Japan and Taiwan here in mid-January doing exactly that, and talking to them about the canal issues as everybody is spinning their wheels in North Asia trying to figure out, if it's going to take me 15 extra days, maybe 18 extra days if I'm loading a corn vessel in New Orleans to go and again bypassing the Suez Canal and going all the way around. What does that do to my inventory flow, my freight cost, and all that? And so always trying to be on top of things that way, as well as giving out the latest results of our corn quality and assuring our buyers around the world, especially as we have more buyers now looking to the PNW, that we have the quality of corn in this region that feeds into that export side of things.
So we have more buyers looking to the PNW. Do the markets that you work with, do they have concerns? You hinted at it, Roz. They have some concerns about purchasing corn and soybeans from PNW. And what are those concerns and how are you working to overcome them?
So on the soy side in particular, Japan and Korea have traditionally focused on the Center Gulf because of the higher protein content. Now, we all know that protein is not the best measure of quality for soybeans, but it is really hard to break tradition, particularly when it's something that is so easy to measure. Protein is quite easy to measure. Similarly to Grains Council, we also do an annual quality report. We work with the University of Minnesota and have done so for, well, I don't know, over a decade for sure, because I've been around for 9 years and it's been going on, it predates me. But to where we can compare the quality across the United States to be able to provide the buyers some assurances as to what they might be receiving in their cargoes. We've seen that difference really shrink over the years, and so it is helping provide a little more assurances for the buyers that there's not as big of a difference, and therefore they ought to be looking at other factors rather than just continuing to go to the Gulf because that's what they've always done. So I think that there's a number of different things. Protein is something that always still comes up because it's so easily measured. But we continue to work with them to try and get them to look at other things rather than just protein. But another advantage that, when you look at Japan and Korea in particular and Taiwan, these are large markets for soy foods. So beans going into soy foods. And there's a logistics opportunity to ship containers from the Midwest out to the West Coast, whether that be up in Vancouver or other parts of the PNW or to Long Beach, to be able to ship those high-value products. So there's a lot of logistics opportunities. There's a lot of marketing opportunities that, again, we have because of our superior logistics system to be able to provide whatever the customers might want from those markets. But I do see a lot more interest in the PNW with the challenges in the canal, the challenges in the Red Sea, which gives us an opportunity to get that product in the hands of customers who have traditionally said they aren't really interested in it. So I think that we're going to finally break that.
Excellent. We have more questions coming in. Any update on if Mexico will continue with their plan regarding the cut of imports of GMO yellow corn from the U.S.?
Great question. It's an ongoing issue. President AMLO there did put in his presidential decree to ban imports of GM corn. It has since been changed. Basically, a year ago, they instituted the ban, but only on white corn. So right now, GM white corn is banned from use in Mexico. So it's affecting white corn only. Now, white corn is still trading from U.S. to Mexico. Some of that is IP non-GM. Some of it, I would say, probably isn't. It is not checked at the border. It is up to the end user in Mexico to regulate that. But it has slowed down our white corn exports from the U.S. to Mexico. It is not affecting yellow corn at all. Actually, I just jotted it down last. Corn exports to Mexico are up 33% versus this time a year ago. So between what's been shipped and what's sold, we're at a 622.6 million bushel, and I think we'll be way above a year ago of our corn exports to Mexico, even with this. The dispute itself, the GMO white corn ban, has gone to the USMCA dispute resolution channel. There is a panel now in place. Just saw an update late last week. They're now expecting that final ruling to come out in November of this year, which puts it after the June 1st presidential election, even puts it after the October 1st when the new president will get sworn in. So I'm confident the U.S. will win on that. Winning the case doesn't mean you will change things, but gives you the opportunity to at least do other things to punish Mexico, which at the end of the day will probably punish the U.S. consumers because they'll put tariffs on Mexican avocados or grapes or tomatoes or something. So at the end of the day, it probably hurts the U.S. consumer more than anything else. But it is definitely something we're standing on. If nothing else, we don't want what Mexico's trying to do. The Colombians, the Peruvians, the Kenyans, whoever are watching this closely. And so if it's really kind of a precedent-setting issue globally if we were to lose this challenge, which the science is behind us, but crazier things have happened. So right now it is only affecting white corn, and yellow corn exports are going through the roof actually to Mexico.
Excellent. How are the changing global demographics creating opportunities, and what challenges are being seen in the emerging markets?
So I think that we were on quite a positive trajectory ahead of the pandemic. To see the emerging world, the developing world, really turn into, economic powerhouses in many ways. And then we had the pandemic, and those fragile economies that were on growth trajectories really struggled, and they've continued to struggle to kind of come out of it, while the rest of the world has done okay with some inflation challenges among others, but those economies have really struggled. A great example would be Egypt. So 2 years ago, COVID also, I don't know if you all noticed it, but it became a time warp. Like, my whole frame of reference for time since COVID has completely changed. I can't keep track. So we'll say 2 years ago. 2 years ago, Egypt became our third largest export market for soybeans. They were growing tremendously. And then it fell off of a cliff because they had foreign exchange issues, they had inflation pressures. So they went from importing over 4 million tons to importing less than 1 million tons. And it wasn't like they were replacing it. They couldn't replace it. So you just see those kinds of things to where there's this tremendous opportunity, tremendous growth, and then all of a sudden something happens and it just falls off of a cliff. So I think that we're going to continue to be in that. There is more recovery happening. Things are stabilizing, but when you're dealing with some of those fragile systems, it just doesn't take very much for them to really stumble. And so we continue to focus on. We've just done a comprehensive international marketing roadmap, we call it SIMMER, because we love acronyms, to where we went through and identified where the markets are for today, where the markets are for tomorrow, and where they are for 10 years from now, to help us be very strategic in where we're focusing on that. We want to continue to focus on differentiation and diversification of our marketplace, and the emerging world is really where most of that is going to take place. We can't forget about our friends in the mature world, are reliable customers, but we need to also be focusing in that emerging world. But it comes with many challenges. The government structures are often much more fragile, and then the economies certainly are much more fragile.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, you see markets in Southeast Asia that have probably come through COVID, Vietnam, Indonesia, that their economies are booming, and some of that has to do with movement, manufacturing movement out of China. But even to add to the Egypt issue, which is getting, where they still have a currency and inflation issue. Their biggest earner of hard currency are fees to go through the Suez Canal, and that's dropping like a rock. And so now the Egyptians trying to find hard currency to buy wheat and soybeans and corn. It's in the Black Sea's backyard, so it's a difficult, tough market for us corn-wise, but the Egyptian government is now losing their biggest hard currency earner in the Suez Canal. Is that everybody, there's still traffic in the Suez Canal, but maybe 75% reduced from what would have been in November even. So,
You mentioned China. How do you see China trade with the financial issues going on?
It's the soybean. Every day you hear different news. Pork prices are depressed. Yesterday I saw pork prices are up because everybody's buying pork ahead of the Chinese New Year holiday. When they say everybody, I don't know if that's the Chinese government buying pork for warehouse supply or if that's actually consumer. But yeah, their economy, I would say, is hurting. Probably not as much as the Chinese government wants to relate. At the same time, while they're still importing large amounts of corn and other feed grains, and when you look at corn, you have to look into what's going on, because they'll buy sorghum, which is predominantly coming from the U.S. They'll buy feed barley, some of the wheat's coming in. They had about 25 million tons of their own wheat production. They got rained on just as at harvest time, so you had domestic wheat going into feed use. Even with that, the Chinese government, their own numbers for corn imports for calendar year 23 was 27 million tons. Brazil came from 0 to 12.8 million of that in 1 year's time. There was about 7 million of that from the U.S. But it's still, it's a very large and important market, whether it's Brazilian corn, U.S. Sorghum, Australian feed barley. It's taking a lot of feed grains off the world market. But going forward with their economy and how much soybeans do they need to import and crush, as both the swine industry has probably been overpopulated and the feed industry tries to balance out what's going on with consumer demand there and the economy. It's not an easy answer, because you'll hear quotes and figures of what is going on, and then the reality of what actually is going on is never the same thing in China. I'll let Roz add on to that.
Well, I think Carrie just kind of captured it. Anybody that says they know what's going on in China, just walk away, because they are lying. There is just no way to actually really know what's happening there. China's the largest market in the world for soybeans, as I said earlier. We are down nearly all of our slowed export pace this year, which is about 30% off of where it was last year, is China. So we are, I can't remember, I should know this number. I can't remember if it's 7 or 9, and that's kind of a big difference, I recognize. But 7 or 9 million metric tons behind where we were last year. And so this is substantial. So what's driving that? Well, that's also, if anybody says they know exactly what's driving it, they are likely lying, because some of it could be the economy. It's hard to really know what's happening with the economy. There's also been a push within China to try and reduce the inclusion of soybean meal in their rations. So there's a lot going on. Clearly, there are some changes happening, because to be that far behind pace is unusual. And some of it has been replaced. Some of the U.S. exports have been replaced by Brazilian, but not 100%. So there's definitely some things going on there when you just look at it. The one thing we do have an advantage in China is that they will only put U.S. soybeans in the state reserve. So sometimes you will see large purchases, and it is designated to go into the state reserve because, again, of the quality. So we've talked about the consistency and the reliability, and they will only store U.S. soybeans for their state reserve.
The other key thing about China, both U.S. Soybean Export Council, U.S. Grain Council, we opened up our office in Beijing in 1982. So now we're 41, getting close to 42 years ago. So the commitment of the corn and soybean industry back in 1982, when China was very much a backwater market and even economy, to be on the ground and to work and build what you now see China as a market today is extremely difficult, merged in the whole U.S.-China relationship, but continues to be an extremely important market for corn and other feed grains and soybean products. So.
We have about 6 minutes left, so we're going to do what I'm calling speed panel.
Okay.
It's like speed dating only. I've never done that, but I'm going
It's
to
horrifying.
try to.
Don't do it. It's horrifying.
I'm going to try to whip through some questions. So, USDA recently announced the Regional Agricultural Promotion Program, which will allow significant funding to promote U.S. agriculture to diversify into new markets and increase market share. So, we've already touched on this, but which areas of the world do you think provides the greatest opportunity for U.S. corn and soybeans, and why?
Well, the RAP, the Regional Agriculture Promotion Program, it is even focused on specific regions. So it does not allow China, Mexico, Canada, Europe. It's very focused on the African continent, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and then the Latin America region. So it's purposely focusing towards there, trying to promote growth of U.S. agricultural export products in those growing areas, and to maybe even be less reliant on some of the more traditional markets for U.S. agricultural exports. And that's in a whole, not just corn and soybeans and others. And so it's focused on there. We had to submit everybody had to submit their proposals by last Friday, so they're in. But I would say those regions are a big focus of that submission that we sent, and I'm sure soybeans as well.
Next question. We've seen trade agreements and trade negotiations take a back seat in some areas of policy. What can we do as farmers to help influencers know how important trade is to our farms?
So it'll be great to also ask that of the next panelist, of Christy, the domestic policy folks. But I think that, the stat I offered, 60% of our soy product goes out as beans, meal, or oil. I don't know how, that statistic alone is pretty remarkable as to the importance of trade. So I think that, there are many different ways we can talk about the value of trade, the importance of trade, but when it comes down to kind of the policy actions that are required in Washington, D.C., that is beyond my scope, thankfully.
Let's talk specifically about trade teams visiting farms. So the question is, I've had a trade team visit my farm. Why is it important to bring officials and purchasers of corn and soybeans to the United States, and what do they learn from these visits?
I think it's extremely important, whether it's government officials, buyers. A lot of times it's a combination of both, for those government officials to see what is production agriculture in North Dakota, Illinois, or wherever they may happen to be going, for those buyers to see and meet face-to-face with the farmers that are producing the products that are being shipped to them, and to see what goes on production-wise and even locally, logistic-wise, to start that journey to get that corn or other feed grains or soybean products to them overseas.
Last question, we'll wrap it up with this, is can you comment on India and what is happening there as far as developing markets for U.S. corn and soybeans?
Well, India is another place that we've been for quite some time, for coming up on 40 years, maybe right at 40 years. So India is a very challenging market. They have traditionally been net exporters of soy and soy products, particularly soybean meal. So, they're a large producer. They're one of the largest producers in the world, but they also have a growing demand domestically, and we actually have seen, I think it was 2 years ago, again, the COVID time warp has occurred, but they opened up a TRQ to import soybean meal. That had never been done before. So there was 2 million tons that was able to go into India for soybean meal. I think that we'll continue to see that demand grow. That's one of the things we're doing. We would have traditionally called it kind of reverse marketing to try and improve the use domestically so that they are no longer exporting and they can't produce what they need, which then gives us an opportunity. There is an interest from many in India for high-quality food-grade soybeans that the U.S. is very good at producing. There are a myriad, I call it the trifecta of challenges. We have GMO challenges because they don't really have a tolerance or a way to allow for it. We have phytosanitary challenges from zero tolerances for weed seeds, and we have a requirement for methyl bromide fumigation or heat treatment. So that's really kind of the trifecta of non-tariff barriers, and then you add in the big one, tariff. So they have very, very high tariffs on imported soy products. So if you can overcome all of those issues, then you got to overcome the financial issue. But I think what we hear from some of the importers is that they see the value in U.S. soy, and they're willing to pay that tariff if we can overcome some of these other things. So, the non-tariff barriers are the trickiest because they can bring up all kinds of technical reasons for why you can't get access to the market. But we continue to be optimistic on India. It's going to happen. We talk about the bright future. We just don't know exactly where that future is going to be. But once India makes the decision and they need the product, all those issues actually go away.
I'll just make a quick comment. We've been active in India for a long time as well. A year and a half ago, we opened an office in New Delhi. So we have full-time staff on the ground working on, and India is basically a policy market, and we're moving corn there today. In the form of corn, no. It's got the tariffs, the GMO issues, the wheat. It's ethanol. So India imports ethanol. They do not let imported ethanol be used for gasoline blending, and so it's replacing. In India today, they went to an E10. They want to go to E20 by the end of 2025. And so all of their sugarcane ethanol is going towards that, and they're importing ethanol to meet their industrial uses of ethanol. But now as they move to that E20 mandate, they're starting to make ethanol even from domestic corn, broken rice. And so you're seeing the feed industry getting squeezed on, you're taking my feed ingredient and making ethanol fine, but now you need to start changing your policies for us to be able to, whether I'm running a cornstarch plant, trying to feed chickens or dairy cows in India, and it's, yes, they do eat meat in India, not everybody, but it is a meat, and then dairy there, and so I think you're gonna see just the economics of shortage of feed ingredients for that industry going to put pressure, whether that's a year from now, 3 years from now, that's the big coin toss, but I think that's gonna move India towards needing to be importing corn, soybean meal, DDGS as their feed industry continues to grow.
Well, thank you so much. You're both sticking around today, is that correct? Yep. So if you have a question that you didn't get submitted, stop and visit with Carrie and Roz. Thanks for coming to the Northern Corn and Soybean Expo and visiting with our farmers, and we're happy to deliver you this beautiful day in Fargo, North Dakota.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's give them a round of applause.